thank you so much for having me. My name is Erin Hegarty. Welcome. I am the researcher for the housing project at Orana House, and I'm the facilitator of today's presentation and discussion. So this session is about education around family and domestic violence, specifically how it affects the real estate industry and property managers. Today's about asking questions and finding a way to move forward in positively as a community. So thank you so much for making the effort to come and join the conversation today. And a very special welcome to the women here who have lived experience of FDV. Okay, let me change. Here we go. I've got two screens going at the moment, so here we are. All right. Orana House acknowledges the traditional custodians of the land we are meeting on, the Whadjuk Noongar people. We wish to acknowledge and respect their continuing culture and the contribution they make to life of this city and region. We wish to pay our respects to their elders past, present and emerging. So today I'm going to take you through a little introduction about Orana House, who we are and what we do, this housing project, my personal background. We will talk about what FDV is, some survey results, which is part of this project, and the program initiative that we're using to move forward. So it's a bit jam-packed. I'll try not to go too fast. Okay, please write your comments in the comment box and we'll go through them when we can. So Orana House is an organisation dedicated to the welfare of FDV victims. We have a refuge, transitional houses and an outreach centre, and typically our women transition through them. Refuge is for crisis, that's where they go straight away, and once they're ready and a transitional house is available, they move into that. And then we help them in our outreach centre. And by that point, they have either moved into Department of Housing or into private rentals. We provide a wraparound service to our clients so they are able to journey through their hard time with strong support services. Our service includes assistance in finding housing for their families. As an organisation, we had enough of the struggle when dealing with our clients trying to find housing. It was always difficult, but it has definitely been exacerbated by COVID-19. Our refuge and others in the Eastern Corridor were full and blocked. Our transitional houses were full and blocked. And the Department of Housing wait list continues to increase dramatically. As of this morning, one of our organisations in the Eastern Corridor has 6 high-risk families in a motel because there is nowhere else for them to go. In their last reporting, they housed 3 clients in a motel for over 10 days at a time because their refuge is full, their transitionals are full, and no one can move out. In this housing crisis, clients who are not necessarily high risk are forced to choose. Do they stay at home with a PERP or do they resort to homelessness? So this project has risen out of a need to build better relationships with real estate agents and provide better educational resources to the industry so that our clients can have better success in finding housing. Oops. So this is me. My name is Erin Hegarty, as I said. I joined the Orana team in September last year as the Housing Project Officer. I come from a not-for-profit operations and research background. I'm the founding director of an international not-for-profit called Mama Respond International, and my research background is in grassroots development. What I know for sure about development is that community buy-in is integral for any sustainable and structural change. It's a process that takes time, one that is built on community, relationships, common drive, common good, shared values and beliefs. And the fact that we are all gathered here today at this moment shows that we share so many values. But first, let me explain a little more about what FDV is. I won't read those descriptions, but they're there for you. Please note that FDV does not discriminate. It occurs in all communities, in all cultures, people of all ages, of all socioeconomic backgrounds, all education levels, and all professions. Domestic violence perpetrated by an intimate partner is one of the most common forms of violence against women. Women are much more likely than men to experience violence from an intimate partner, with more than with more severe impacts that include being hospitalized and death. It sounds a bit dramatic, but it's true. Okay, we're going to do a little true and false. Oopsie, a little true and false thing here. If you can put it in the comment section, do you think this is true or false? Most people who commit violence are under the effects of drugs and alcohol. What do you think? True or false? Most people who commit violence are under the effects of drugs and alcohol. I'm afraid that is false. Although many substance abusive partners also abuse drugs and alcohol, and some are more likely to be violent when using them, it is not the underlying cause of the abuse. Many people who drink and use drugs are not violent or abusive. It does not cause domestic violence. Let's do another one. True or false? Put it in the comments. Violence is about anger and rage. The perpetrator just snapped because they were angry. Do you think that's true or false? It's about anger and rage. They just snapped because they were angry. I'm afraid that is false. FDV is about power and it's about control. It almost always happens in private with no witnesses. Perpetrators do not generally abuse workmates or bosses, for example, when they're stressed or when they're angry, but they will come home and they will abuse their partners, and often physically in places that are not visible to somebody else. They are highly manipulative, and they blame the victim when they are physically violent for making them angry. One more, true or false? If it was FDV, the victim would have already left. If it was FDV, the victim would have already left. I'm afraid that is also false. There are so many reasons why women may not leave, and we're going to go into that more. But it doesn't mean, just because they're not leaving, doesn't mean the situation is okay or that the victim wants to be abused. The most dangerous time for a woman is when she tries to leave. Sometimes they don't even want the relationship to necessarily end, but they want the violence to stop. It's our duty to provide non-judgmental support. Okay, now I've got some statistics for you here. Did you know that 1 in 6 women in Australia have experienced physical or sexual violence by a current partner or a previous partner since the age of 16? Let's say we've got 30 viewers today, or maybe you've got 30 people in your workforce. That's a lot. That is a lot of women who have experienced physical or sexual violence. And 1 in 4 have experienced emotional abuse. So the emotional aspect is actually more common than the physical aspect. It's really important that we remember that FDV isn't just physical. It is more often emotional or psychological. So let's talk about the different types of abuse that there are. That's a big list. We'll try to get through them. So there's coercive control. This involves something like encouraging family members and friends to shame or abuse the victim, rejecting or shunning the victim in an attempt to control her behavior, humiliating, intimidating. Emotional and psychological abuse, that would be manipulation. Insults, name calling, mocking the person, blaming the victim for their problems, saying, like, you made me do it because dinner wasn't ready, or it can be very minuscule things like that, and that really brings a person down, really affects their confidence and who they are. It could be threatening to give away, harm or kill their pets, threatening to commit suicide to hurt the children or people around them. So really bullying them and pushing them into a corner where it's like, if you don't do as I say, I will hurt all the people around you. Withdrawing interest and engagement, and often making the victim think that she's made things up or that she's going crazy. Physical abuse is pretty straightforward. We might glaze over that one. Sexual assault Sexual abuse and assault. Sexual abuse is quite clear. Assault could be name calling, constant criticism, mocking, and turning other people against the victim. Economic abuse is one that you might see as a real estate agent, especially behind the scenes. So an abuser might have complete control of the money. So for you, you might see that the bills or the rent is always coming out of his account only. It might not be a joint account. She might be unemployed and would never get a job because he won't let her. He might be using her money without consent or not providing her an adequate allowance for the kids. So when you go into the home, you might think you know their income, but they're looking a little disheveled, like they're not really using that money wisely. He could create debt, often in the victim's name. And then another form of that would be if your tenant, if you have a family in there, but the tenancy is only in his name, that would be economic abuse as well. Then we have stalking and harassing. So maybe the perpetrator shows up at the victim's house. They might follow the victim, harass them, leave unwanted gifts. Technology and image-based. This one you might come in, you might see a fair bit as well. So they might, an abuser might monitor phone calls, texts, or emails of the victim. So you might see that your victim is changing their email regularly, especially if there's someone who has gone through FDV and they're out on the other side. They might be changing that constantly because of fear of them stalking and following and tracking them. So it's really important that you make sure that you keep your databases up to date with the updated phone numbers, emails, and things like that, because it might seem erratic, but actually they might be protecting themselves and their kids. They might hack into the victim's account, use GPSs and other devices to track the victim and vilify the victim. They might even set up false accounts on Facebook to control and stalk them that way. Then there's spiritual and cultural abuse. That comes down to abusing someone's belief or not allowing them to believe or forcing them into a religion that they don't believe in. And also for some cultures, leaving their partner is a huge problem, and that is a big no-no when you don't do it. So they might use that against them. Social abuse and isolation. They might stop the person seeing their friends, forbid them from leaving the house. That's something else you might see if they're always home. They might not have a car. They might not go to the shops a lot, but they're always there. They might be rude to friends and family. And they might even move to a location where they take away all the resources and networks of the victim. Then there's reproductive abuse. This one's fairly heartbreaking. It would be forbidding the victim to use contraception, forcing a victim to have an abortion, or not allowing the victim to have an abortion, or even rejecting a child. So that all sounds pretty bloody horrible. Why then don't these women leave? This sounds awful. There are a multitude of barriers why a woman won't leave. And remember, I said that when they do leave, that is the most dangerous time for them. So they might fear being killed, further abuse, stalking. Their partner might be threatening them with suicide, hurting the children or the pets. They might fear that if they leave, they'll be isolated because their friends will take the perpetrator's side because he's such a great guy. Everyone loves him. How could he be an abuser, right? Here's one that we can all contribute to: homelessness. Where are they going to go? Shame, embarrassment, or denial that it's their fault. There's a lot of emotions going on here. How did they get themselves in this situation? They're to blame for it. Trauma and low self-confidence. They've just gone through all of this abuse, and often an abuser will use every type of abuse that I've just mentioned. How much confidence do you think they have at the end of that? And of course, financial barriers. We've got like immigration status. Often if they're not an Australian citizen, that can be used against them. Failure of the justice system, and a hope and a belief that that partner will actually just change and be nice. So coming to the end of our kind of FDV educational aspect, I want to reflect on your workplace. Does your workplace have protocols in place to deal with FDV? Is your workplace FDV informed? Was a lot of this new information to you? Did you know a lot of it, but you don't know how to see it? Or maybe you don't know what to do when you do recognise FDV in one of your tenancies. How do you use these protocols if your workplace has them? And how are you describing FDV when you're writing reports? That can be quite damaging for them trying to move forward into a new home, into a new private rental when they get a reference and that. How are you describing it? How are you talking about this? So that's a very open conversation that we don't really have time to have today. But please note that we are really working on that, and we are here to assist with any sort of protocols or policies that you want to put in place in your workplace. And also this little session I just did for just 15 minutes about FDV is just skimming the surface. I haven't even told you a story yet. So we are here and we are developing a much more in-depth program to give to your staff. So if you are interested in that, please do not hesitate to get in contact. So a little more about the project itself. I will now take you through the housing project, which is led by Orana on behalf of the Eastern Corridor. Now, the Eastern Corridor runs from Midland all the way down to Armidale and across. So basically, Orana had this issue with housing and they wanted to do something about it. So they started asking the question, well, what are the challenges around private rentals and FDV? And that's where I came on board and I started surveying 4 cohorts of people. So I surveyed women with lived experience, industry professionals, like refuge workers, support workers, outreach workers, real estate agents such as yourselves, perhaps some of you did contribute to this survey, and landlords. They were online. We had 105 participants so far, and there were 14 to 16 questions per survey. So I'll take you through some of the results now. So the clients, they were asked questions about their rental history, if they've broken their lease due to FDV, how they feel when dealing with real estate agents' perceptions and their biggest challenges in the process. Most alarmingly, 100% of respondents described their experience in the rental market negatively, using words like stressful, nearly impossible, depressing, bad, hard. And when asked how they would describe their overall experience when applying for private rentals, 60% said either bad, I've applied to many and received none, I don't know what the problem is, or terrible. A 100% of respondents felt like they were being discriminated against. The biggest words in this word cloud are the most common response: single mother. They felt they were being judged for being a single mother. Have a think now and really reflect on what your idea of a single mother is. Are you a single mother? Is your mum a single mother, your ex-partner, your sister or your daughter? What are your biases towards single mothers? So I then went and surveyed industry professionals as well. Their responses were honest and underpinned by determined advocacy. The consensus was a feeling of discrimination and prejudice towards the following cohorts: people who are Indigenous and culturally and linguistically diverse, welfare recipients, women and families who have experienced FDV, single mothers, and those who are economically disadvantaged. Now, these 5 cohorts rarely stand alone. And women who have experienced FDV often tick every single one of those boxes. So here I've got some quotes from the private rentals. I'm sorry, I've eaten something terrible and made my nose itch so much, so please ignore me doing that a lot. Okay, so here are some quotes from the industry professional surveys. I'll take you to the first one, but the 3 of them are quite confronting. Negative social ideas that women with FDV history will bring complications and potential trouble with dangerous men coming to the rental property. So that was written by an industry professional about what they think real estate agents are thinking. They're pretty on point, to be honest. So please write in the comments, yes or no. Are you concerned as a real estate agent housing someone who has gone through FDV that the perp would return and damage the property? Are you scared that the perp will return and damage the property? Does that affect your idea of putting someone who's gone through FDV into the into your house? If you said yes, you are part of an 84% majority. 84% of respondents expressed their fear of the perp returning and or damage to the property. And of that 84%, 63% combined those two reasons. So they said they fear the perp returning and damage to the property. So that's a huge majority. My next question then was, well, how rational is that? When asked to rate their experience with tenants who have experienced FDV historically, 77% of respondents said it was great, there were no issues, or satisfactory, some issues of no real concern. When real estate agents were asked the same question, but about FDV while experienced on the lease, so their client or their tenant has gone through FDV while engaged with them, nearly 60% said it was satisfactory. There were some issues of no real concern. So although over 80% of respondents of real estate agents said they fear the perp returning and damage to the property, an alarming majority had a non-concerned experience with FDV when experienced historically or while on the lease, thereby entirely undermining their own fear. The landlord surveys have not yet been fully analysed, but I do have one quick response here. There's been 25 respondents so far, and of those 25, 42% said they will go with the real estate agent's recommendation when choosing a new tenant, indicating that real estate agents do indeed have influence. Okay, so after I did all those surveys, we conducted a roundtable session in March with about 18 people who were industry professionals like refuge and outreach workers, landlords, real estate agents, women with lived experience, and REWA representatives. We went over these results and we had a really in-depth conversation about the issues that we face in our industries. So what came out of that roundtable session was two wonderful programs. One of them is exactly what we're doing here. It's about education. The real estate agents present said that though they do some sort of FDV education with your point system, it's really not in depth and they need more education about what it is, what it looks like, how to deal with that. We are now in the process of designing a program that works both virtually and in person so that we can roll out better education about FDV so that you are more capable of responding to it and implementing better policies in your workplace. Then we also designed a pilot program. So basically, based on all that I've said, it's become very clear that the whole process of applying for a house is really detrimental to a client's mental health, and they're already in a bad way. They've just left the perpetrator, they're in crisis, and it's very challenging. So we've designed a pilot program with from the roundtable that is essentially a contact register. It eliminates the whole process of lining up, being the bottom of the barrel, being rejected, and it just connects us as industry professionals to you as real estate agents. So on the register, there is a list of industry professionals in the Eastern Corridor, and there's a list of real estate agents and companies who have signed up to the program. So we send them three things: the area that our client is looking in, the number of bedrooms they need, and the amount of rent they can pay, and that's it. And we just send that to you, and then you talk to your landlord, or if it depends on your relationship with them, of course, but theoretically you talk to the landlord. They say, yeah, we want to be more socially aware and do the and make ethical decisions. So yes, send through their application. You then get in contact with us. You say, I've got this place in your area with your number of bedrooms and the amount of rent you can pay. Can you send through an application? We do that. In theory, it's accepted, and we put our women into housing. It's a very simple process, but one that just eliminates all that hoo-ha for us, having to deal with clients. Sometimes we have to drive them to these places, or they have to get the bus with all their kids, and it's really challenging. But also it eliminates the home opens for you guys as well, and means that you don't have to advertise houses, that we can take them on straight away after the last tenancy. So that is what the program is looking like now, and you've just been a part of it. So thank you so much for doing that. I've got some really fantastic news today, and I'm so excited to announce it. We have just put our first client through the program successfully today, and that is thanks to our host, Ashleigh. So one of our clients from Nardine has now been housed through Soco Realty. And I spoke to the team at Nardine on the phone, and they were just ecstatic with excitement that they got one of their clients into a private house before their time ended at the Refuge. It's unheard of, and they are so happy. I'm also absolutely thrilled to announce that we will be partnering with PM Collective in support for the project, so that we can have a little more backing behind these women being pushed through the program, so that if you have a landlord who's a bit like, not sure, we can say, don't worry, we've got further backing from PM Collective. So that's the program. It does have its limitations. At the moment, it's only based in the Eastern Corridor with Orana House, Starrick, Nardine, and Kulkuna. You don't need to remember them. They'll be on the contact register. And we are looking for more avenues and more real estate agents and companies to sign up to the program so that we can email you directly. As it expands, we can then expand to other agencies and to the more of Perth district. So if you have any questions or comments, I'd love to take them now. And I'll just also put up my details there so that you can contact me directly if you have any concerns, questions, ideas. I'm absolutely here to listen to all of them.
Well, I will go first, and then if anyone else wants to unmute themselves, they can. I think with your stats, what's really which is very, very true, was with the family that we were able to house. And I just want to bring it to everyone's attention, is that it very much did come from the relationship that we have with the landlord. And when we have a landlord that completely trusts us with our opinion of who should be in the property, they will say yes to whoever we say yes to. So it's so true that the influence is directly from that property manager, putting it through to the owner. And for us personally, we didn't have any issues at all with presenting that to the owner. And the owner had no hesitations with us accepting it either, because she trusts us as the property manager. So that was just the first thing I just wanted to show, that there is a lot of influence behind us. But the other thing that I think is really interesting is that, and my personal concern, I am one of those people that did have the concern that, there will be damage to the property. However, in my experience, I've never, ever had any concerns at all. So I was really trying to think of where that thought comes from for me personally. And I actually think it comes from my concern with people getting back with their partner, as opposed to necessarily the damage to the property, but just them letting them back into their lives. And I think I have that thought, and I'm sure a lot of people do have that thought, because we've experienced friends that, are on and off and divulge their marital issues with us, and we see them still with their partner, and we get frustrated at why they're still with their partner when they're dealing with all of this. And I think that's where my thought comes from, because I on a personal level, I deal with friends like that, and I bring that into my work.
Yeah, and statistically, women take 7 attempts to leave before it's permanent. So that is a very real concern, that they might go back to them. I suppose we can be a little more rest assured knowing that By the time we're referring them to this program, they have been with us for over a year. So they spend up to 3 months in the refuge, but longer, like during COVID, they spent 7 to 14 months in the refuge. Ideally no longer than 3 months. And then we move them into our transitional houses. We have 6. So at any one time, we can have 6 different families in a transitional house for a year. Then if there's nowhere for them to move, like during COVID, we had to shuffle them around our transitionals because people who run them have policies about how long they're in there. So let's say ideally they're in the refuge for 3 months and then they're in transitionals for a year. By the time we're referring them to you, they've been a client of ours for 15 months or so. They've done a lot of they've made a lot of progress. They've got a lot of support services around them. And yes, some of them do go back to partner eventually in the very long run. So I can't say that they won't, but I think we can have confidence that they've been a client of ours for so long. We've done so much work with them that it's we are not going to refer someone to this program and to your office who we think is likely to go back to them and cause those sort of problems, because we don't want to perish these relationships. So they're the type of person that we would put into Department of Housing rather.
Yeah, and I think when you explained that to me, that was so important, and that's like the biggest message I want to get out to all the property managers, is that we aren't talking about families that are like leaving and are on day one. They've been down this journey and therefore a safer option. I'm going to ask one more question, and then what I'm going to do is I'm going to stop the recording so that if anyone wants to ask questions more privately, it's not on record. But my last question is, ironically, I had a phone call from a client today who wants us to manage their home, but he specifically asked whether I had any associations with people that are from the Ukraine and domestic violence. It was just ironic that I actually had the phone call today. And I said, listen, you're speaking to the right person. I've got all these contacts. But what he was actually quite interested in was what you call the transitional house. He was quite interested in offering his house for obviously a reasonable rent to, you know, Red Cross or Salvos or Starrick or, you know, that type of thing, and then let you use it as a home as you need, and holding the main head lease on it. Is there a demand for that type of transitional housing, or and how would they go about doing that if they did want to?
Yeah, absolutely. So there is a need for it. So Nardine, for example, they don't have any transitionals, so they are looking for that. To make that happen, you can definitely put them in contact with me, and then I can build those relationships with the organizations. Like I said, we have 6 transitionals, and I think if you were to ask anyone in the Eastern Corridor, do you want more transitionals or transitionals, they'd be like, yes, we do. But it now comes down to capacity. So we it can be difficult because of how many staff we have, but it can also be difficult because we can house 5 families in our refuge. But it's like if they come from refuge into transitional, it's got to be a process. So if we have those transitionals empty, we are at risk of losing them, and then whoever manages them, which is St. Vinny's or Foundation Housing, will give them to another organization. So there's kind of pressures like that. So short answer, absolutely yes, send them through to us. Long answer, it can be a bit more complex, which means that we can't always say yes to that sort of expansion, but we would love to consider it and be able to have that conversation.
Wonderful.